Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk you through and walk you through a simple melt and pour soap tutorial. This should walk you from beginning to end, and if you have any questions, if I leave something out, please ask questions in the comments. I'm just quickly sanitizing my surfaces and equipment here. They were pre-washed, so they were already clean. And then I'm spraying with 70% rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, and you leave that for about 30 seconds. I sped a little bit through that through editing, but I did wait 30 seconds and then wiped clean with a lint-free towel or paper towel, whatever you tend to use. I use two types of alcohol. The one with the white cap is the 70%. The one in the blue bottle is 91 or 99, depending on what I have. And I use that for other purposes, which really don't matter for this tutorial. But you see me here starting to chop the soap. I'm going to chop them into about 1-inch little blocks, little tiny squares, cubes. And I'm using premium crystal clear from Crafter's Choice. Or Crafter's Choice is the brand. I find mine at Wholesale Supplies Plus. And I'm cutting up 1 pound of it on a sanitized cutter and cutting board that are only used for soap. I'm going to be placing that in my heat-safe pitcher and using my heat-safe stirring tool. I tend to melt my soap in a microwave, but you can also use a double boiler setup. Just a simmering pan with a bowl over the top. Simmering pan of water, just an inch or two, and make sure your bowl doesn't touch the simmering water, and at a low temperature, just barely simmering. I'm using soap safe colorant. I prefer Mica. You can also use soap safe liquid dyes or color blocks. Soap safe fragrance, the amounts are listed. That's at 1%. Following the IFRA guidelines. I go more into that in my fragrance tutorial in my beginner series. Please watch that if you have any questions as I go into much more detail. You see some optional things here. Titanium dioxide dispersed into glycerin isn't necessary, but I wanted to show you something with that and give you some options for colorants. Some of the other items I mentioned are also optional for this soap. You will need a thermometer if you're doing more complicated soaps, and you will also need to be very aware of your soap's melting point and make sure that your soap doesn't boil, burn, get very steamy hot. You've got to err on the side of caution when it comes to how long you put it in the microwave. I'll be putting mine in, and the standard is to put it in for 30-second bursts, stirring in between. I also prefer to start tapering that amount down as I get closer to my melting point where I want it. I do take it a little above the melting point when I'm first melting the soap, because don't forget you have to add your, well, you don't have to, but I like to add my fragrances and my colorants, and you want to do that when it's melted, and that can cause quick cooling to happen, especially if you disperse your micas in alcohol. So just take it a little bit above, maybe, I don't know, 3 to 5 degrees above the melting point is about what I tend to do if I'm not doing something where the soap is calling for a higher temperature, which happens occasionally, but you still have to be sure not to boil it. I don't know what mess that is I'm wiping up, but I am a messy soaper. I'll just tell you that up front. So I'm off to microwave this at 30-second increments. I think it only took me 2 30-second increments and maybe 1 or 2 of 15 seconds there. I'm getting ready. It's mostly clear. The soap, which it will get cloudy if you overheat it, by the way, among other things. The fragrance I'm adding is Blue Raspberry from New Directions. This fragrance, I've used a gazillion times. It's not going to discolor more than what you see here. As I stir it in, it discolors a very tiny amount. And really, normally I would kind of leave it alone, but I'm going to show you a little trick to counteract that. You see how it's just a twinge of yellow in there. And it won't discolor further than that. There's no vanillin in this or anything else that will tend to discolor your soap. But I always do a test, which I will show you what I'm doing later in this video for a test bar. But since it's a little yellow and I'm stirring, and I stirred the fragrance in extremely well, which is also important for your skin safety, but it also can clear up anything that tends to be cloudy from your fragrance. If it's your fragrance oil that's clouding it. If it's yellowed like this, you can counteract that just a little bit by adding a very small amount of soap-safe liquid dye. Please don't use food coloring. I'm probably not even using a quarter of a drop. It is such a small amount there. I'm barely touching that to a stir stick, and I honestly could have gotten away with adding half that amount and it still would have cleared it up. I went a little overboard, because I think it went just a little blue to me, but it doesn't hurt anything once it gets in the bar form. It pretty much looks clear. And stirring that in well. I'm about to split my batch because I'm doing a couple of different things with soap colorants, and I wanted to divide it that way to make it a little easier on me to keep track of that. So you'll see me pouring off. I'm measuring it with a scale. I'm measuring my temperature first. Look at that, 126 to 127. Always stir before you take that measurement because the top can cool off quite quickly and the underneath can be really hot. That becomes more important when you're doing more complicated techniques like pouring into a soap with embeds, or pouring over embeds, or embedding soap into soap. And many other things. It can be super important to know the exact temperature. So I'm just pouring out 8 ounces into this smaller little pitcher. I prefer these pour pitchers. They are heat and microwave safe, and they allow me, that longer spout allows me to get down lower to the soap and gives me more control with the amount of soap that I'm pouring. I find that very important. You might not. You might want to use a Pyrex. Those work fabulously. And they do keep the heat in a little bit longer. Just something to keep in mind. I'm using just a plain old silicone mold I found on Amazon. It's a 6 cavity. I'm only using 4 of those today. And I'm pouring out my first soap, which is just clear. This is my fragrance tester. It will show you, if you do one of these tests, how is the fragrance holding up? Is it in a week? Is it discoloring brown or green or yellow? Is it doing that in 3 weeks? You want to know, because you don't want to sell a soap or give a soap to somebody and have it turn an icky color and ruin your design. A lot of times it just doesn't matter, but for those kinds of soaps where it matters, you just want to know ahead of time. That's why I do a test. So I'm putting a tiny, tiny bit, not even an eighth, maybe an eighth of a teaspoon, but I don't even think it's that much, into that's just 4 ounces left from the first soap I poured. And already, of course, I fragranced it earlier. I like to do that all at once, so then when I divide it and use it, I don't have to worry about fragrancing it again. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I'm fragrancing at 1%. I like to err on the side of caution with that as well, and not risk harming someone's skin. Your soap isn't really meant to fragrance your skin, just to enjoy it while you're using the soap. That tiny bit of mica, as you will see, stirred in and is extremely transparent. You can get a transparent look from using micas. You just have to use a very small amount and a very brilliant color. If you did a really pale blue, you would not be seeing any blue in this at all. So I used a very intense Key West mica from Mad Micas. But you see the shimmer. You see when I spritzed with alcohol to get rid of the bubbles, which I always do. When pouring a soap like this, you always want to spritz after you pour to get rid of the bubbles. I usually do it a couple of times. Sometimes I come back a second or two later because another bubble or so has risen up. But you see that mica, you see the shimmer kind of catching the light there. It's a beautiful effect. And you don't really see the shimmer once I unmold it, but you will see how transparent the soap stays. I'm getting ready to add more mica because the next 2 soaps I pour, I want to demonstrate how different ways you can get an opaque look with your soap, even if you're not buying an opaque soap like a goat's milk. If you're using clear, you can get a fairly opaque and or darker color by adding a larger amount of an intense colored mica. And I'm just stirring in a half teaspoon into 1 teaspoon of rubbing alcohol. Helps it to disperse more evenly and quickly. It will disperse if you put it in dry. It just takes longer, takes more stirring, and if your soap is on the verge of cooling, you might have to heat it up again, which is what I do in a moment. But first, I'm just going to pour that in there and get an idea of how opaque it is. I like to, when I'm doing a soap that's a really brilliant color, especially if I'm making something to go in another soap, a certain look I want, I might want it to be completely opaque. You can also add a drop or 2 of titanium dioxide, which you'll see me do a little bit later, but it will lighten the color. If you're just using a drop or 2, it's not going to affect it that much, but we'll give it a little bit more opacity. There's where I added the dry mica in. It just wasn't as opaque as I wanted it to be, but it's lumpy. It's a little harder to stir in, and would have stirred in if I just kept stirring, but it also would have cooled it off a little too much. So I run to the microwave and heat it for literally just 10 seconds. That's it. 10 seconds and it's already perfectly fluid, and the mica is pretty well stirred in as well, and gives me a little bit more wiggle room of time to stir it in, make sure it's stirred in, and then add something else to it and pour another soap. So you see that 10 seconds goes a really long way when it comes to just topping off that heat a little bit, taking it back to a more fluid state. You don't need to put it in for 30 seconds. You'll be burning it if you do that. So just pouring in this the opaque blue. Look how shimmery and how opaque it is. Shimmery and pearlescent and almost has a metallic finish to it. I love that look. It's beautiful. You might end up with a little bit of blue suds, or if you have any other intense color, you might end up coloring the suds slightly. It's not going to do very much to it. And it certainly isn't going to stain your skin. If you're using a soap that has a little bit of color in the suds, it won't hurt anything. So there's the titanium dioxide dispersed in, it's a powder, comes as a powder, and it disperses in glycerin. Some types disperse in oil, some in water. This type I purchased, I believe, disperses in either one, or it's water dispersible. I'm not sure, but it works very well in glycerin. That you can add glycerin in small amounts to glycerin soap. You have to be careful, because if you add too much, you'll get a lot of glycerin dew. You'll also get glycerin dew if you overheat it or just leave it out if you don't wrap it quickly enough, or put it in a place where the air is circulating really well before you wrap it airtight. I live in a very humid state, and I combat this a lot. It is compatible. You can spritz it with alcohol, you can wipe it away, you can rinse it away. There's a variety of things you can do. I won't go into that too much because I don't have time in this video. But what I did there at the tail end is I poured the rest with the titanium dioxide into the more opaque blue soap. I just wanted to show you how quickly titanium dioxide, or soaps with titanium dioxide, goat milk, shea butter, etc., will sink. It is going to be heavier. Titanium dioxide is heavy, and it will sink to the bottom. In very rare cases, you can get it to float a little bit more if you get the temperatures right. The lower the temperature, the more control you have over that. This is the clear one. Look how clear that shows up. You might be able to see a twinge of blue, but really not enough to matter. It looks clear. And it's not going to change colors from this because of the fragrance oil I chose. Wow. So here's the titanium dioxide part. There's where it sank to the bottom and then spread out along the bottom. If the soap had been hotter, it probably would have spread all the way across the bottom. That's just what it tends to do. Sometimes you'll get those little rivery kind of, it's not really glycerin rivers, but it looks like it, little kind of, I don't know, spider-like look to it, but not always. So you can't count on that as a design element. I just wanted to show you how it sinks, because when you learn eventually, and I'm hoping you come back to learn how to swirl and layer, etc., and do different various techniques and designs, that's just something important to know. And I had a moment there to share that with you and show you a quick little demo with it. Titanium dioxide will also make your soap take longer to set up. So keep in mind, soap will set up at different times depending on the type of soap, the brand of soap, what your melting point is, how hot you had it, how hot your house is, how humid your house is, or studio, wherever you're working. And so you have to just touch it, touch the top, touch the bottom, whatever you need to do. Don't push hard with your fingers. You're going to put a great big old fingerprint in it if it's not ready to come out. Or you might even have it kind of come apart on you and squish out like one of those, I don't know, squishers, whatever they called those candy with the gel stuff in the middle. Got to be careful. So make sure it's set up half hour to an hour for soap like this, maybe even an hour and a half, depending on your circumstances. The hotter the melting point, the quicker it sets up. The little blue one that's super clear, I love the way that one came out. Again, just a tiny amount of a very brilliant colored mica, and it is so see-through. It looks almost as if you had done it with liquid soap dye. I'm not against using liquid soap dye, but if you combine that with other colorants, you are likely to have bleeding, and the color will disperse throughout the soap and not play nice with the other colors. I'm hoping that I got in all of the information I planned. If I left something out, again, please put that in the comments. Here are some soaps that are I'm going to be working on in my beginner series. Layering, what you can add to soaps was the first one. Making confetti soaps, those are so easy and make a great design. Some simple crystals, these are a lot simpler than they look. And then some more complicated crystal soaps too. These are using a variety of techniques. Swirl, this is just a 2-color acorn swirl, and this is a 3-color swirl. It's not really an acorn swirl, it's kind of my own technique that I'll be sharing with you. This one has a little bit of swirling plus embeds, and here we have a more simpler embed soap and a more complicated embed soap. And there's a lot of other techniques I'm not sharing with you today, but I hope you come back and follow my beginner melt and pour series to learn more. Thanks for stopping by.